Hello everybody and welcome to Abnormal Psychology. We're into the last chapter and we're going to be looking at abnormal behavior across the lifespan. Now, the psychological problems experienced by children and young people are often especially poignant in that they affect the child at the time of their lives and when they are relatively little ability to cope with these things. Now, some problems of childhood prevent children from reaching their potential, or other minor problems that are faced by adults. So finally, there are some problems that are unique to childhood or disorders that manifest themselves differently in children compared to adults. Now, what is considered normal or abnormal for children must be considered in the light of developmental issues, in addition to the factors that which face ethnicity and gender. So what is acceptable behavior for one's age becomes unacceptable as the child grows older. Consider the following examples. Now, these examples are brief and are not intended to provide enough information to make any diagnosis, as any parent might be able to say that their son or their daughter does these things. These examples are just trying to differentiate between disorders. Okay, 8-year-old Penny cannot tolerate having her parents out of sight. Upon arrival at school, Penny clings to her mother, refusing to leave the car. And as her mother walks her to the classroom, Penny cries and screams and begs for her mother to not leave. The diagnosis in this instance might be separation anxiety disorder. Now, we chatted about that one when we looked into, I think it was around anxiety issues. So we won't be revisiting it here. Now, 10-year-old Philip's parents are frustrated by Philip's continuing defiance, constant arguments, and vindictiveness. Now, today, Philip is refusing to come out of his bedroom to greet his friends and relatives attending his mother's surprise birthday party. He shouts at his parents, "You can't make me do anything." Diagnosis: oppositional defiant disorder. Now, sitting in a psychologist's office, a mother explains that ever since he was in preschool, her son Billy, who is now 10, has disrupted the classroom instruction. He has difficulty concentrating and is failing most of his subjects. Throughout the session, Billy fidgets and interrupts his mother. Diagnosis: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 5-year-old Hamed. He sits apart from the other children, spinning the wheel of a toy truck and humming aloud as if to mimic the sound. Hamed seems to live in a world of his own, interacting with those around him as if they were an inanimate object. In his case, diagnosis could be autism spectrum disorder. Now, we're going to start with, because we've touched on a number of them just with those examples, but we're going to start with neurodevelopmental disorders. Then we'll move into disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders, and then we'll follow that with more of the neurocognitive disorders. So let's get started with this chapter. Neurodevelopmental disorders are disorders that emerge in the developmental period, basically in the first few years of life. We're going to begin with autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is one of the most severe childhood disorders. Autism spectrum disorder is characterized by pervasive deficits in the ability to relate to and communicate with others, and by a restricted range of activities and interests. Children with autism spectrum disorder lack the ability to relate to others and seem to live in their own little private worlds. Autism spectrum disorder involves marked deficiencies in multiple areas of development. Now, these deficits develop within the first years of life and are often associated with an intellectual disability. some of the features that might be included with autism spectrum disorder. And again, I would encourage you to check the tables in your text for more complete views of the features. But they have a tendency to shun affectionate behavior. They engage in very stereotypical or stereotyped behavior, attempt to preserve sameness. They don't like change too much. Engage in a particular or a peculiar speech habit, such as echolalia. Sorry about that. It's or pronoun reversal or idiosyncratic speech. Now, the causes of the disorder are really unknown, and it's a lifelong condition. It is a spectrum disorder. That just means there's a degree of range. Now, I've worked with different people with autism spectrum disorder, some that need a 24-hour support and some that can live independently on their own. So it's a wide range, as a lot of these disabilities are. Theoretically, the early views, like those of the 50s and back in the 50s, looked at the pathology and looked at the pathological family relationships. That's the cause. See, this is where the 50s did create some problems for different people with disabilities, is that they were blamed for the reason that their children developed the way they did. And so the pathological family was a family that was expressing cold, detached parents, affected the development of autism in some children. Now, this was a common position for very many disorders, and research does not support blaming the parents anymore. Psychologist LeVar Lovaas focused more on the perceptual deficits and be able to process one stimuli at a time. Moving into the cognitive theories, they're looking at the relationship between integrating information from various senses and hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity to stimuli. Now, this would impede what psychologists call theory of mind hypothesis. Now, that just means that there's a separation and acceptance that there is a you and there are others. So there's a me and there's others. And they're different. So MRI scans show differences from non-autistic brains, including the connective tissue between the two halves of the brain, the corpus callosum. This is the lateralization differences that may suggest a cause feature. Neurodevelopmental deficits look like they can also be important. This view looks at genetic and therefore chromosomal suspicions for a cause. But causes, they aren't clear. And I'll put it out there in this video just to say, if you've heard, that vaccinations caused this in children, that research was done by a British researcher that has since been clearly debunked. It is not accurate and it is not a statement of truth. When we look at treatments, there is no cure for autism spectrum disorder. However, intensive behavioral intervention, it's known as IBI, which are structured treatment programs and have had some success, particularly when they are started early in any diagnosis. Now, like any of these sort of lifelong disorders, biological options are really kind of limited in their success. There have been some early successes with computer programs. There's one that's called FaceSay, and it helps in teaching autistic children face recognition and social skills and emotional recognition. The next disorder we're going to look at is intellectual disability, also been known as intellectual developmental disorder. Intellectual disability is also called intellectual developmental disorder and involves a broad delay in development of cognitive and social functioning. In many cases, intellectual disability can be traced to a biological cause, including chromosomal and genetic disorders, even infectious diseases and brain damage. The most common chromosomal abnormality resulting in an intellectual disability is known as Down syndrome. Other genetic abnormalities include Fragile X syndrome, PKU, and Tay-Sachs disease. Now, other than chromosomal abnormalities, intellectual disabilities may be caused by prenatal factors such as maternal disease, alcohol, and other drugs. There's even cultural familial factors associated with intellectual impoverished home environments. Under-resourced, you don't have many toys and many things for children to engage with. They might be delaying some of their development. Mainstreaming, this is a term that was used to describe the practice of having students all be together. Prior to mainstreaming, all kids with no disability were in classes together, but they had separate classes, segregated classes for children with disabilities. And it's quite a departure from that. So along with mainstreaming, there was a practice back in the 70s, I guess, when I remember that, 70s and 80s, of deinstitutionalization. And it's a process of also placing people who are disabled from institutions into their home communities. And in the communities, they had access to learn in either workshops, group homes, or other supported community services to assist them in learning life skills, interpersonal skills, employment skills. I probably spent the better part of 35 years working in that field as a behavior consultant and saw many, many wonderful people do wonderful things with their lives. The next area we can look at is really another special sort of an area. It's called specific learning disorder. Specific learning disorders is a deficiency in a specific learning ability, noteworthy because the individual's general intelligence and exposure to learning opportunities are there, but I will make a distinction in a moment here. The DSM-5 classifies specific learning disorders as a single disorder with 3 subtypes. There's a subtype with an impairment with mathematics, an impairment in written expression, or an impairment in reading. Dyscalculia, dyslexia are examples of learning disorders that would fit in there. Now, it's important to note, and this is where I was saying here, I'm coming back to it. A diagnosis with a learning disability is not a diagnosis about intelligence. And in fact, one of the conditions of having a learning disorder or a learning disability is that your intelligence must be at least average, normal. It's a neurological impairment where some form of intervention, whether it be accommodation or learning strategy for that specific learning disability, that is what, if you will, essentially is aimed at equaling the playing field for those affected. In schools, if you were in public school or high school, you may have heard the term IEP, or Individual Educational Plan. Well, that would have been something that would be used for students in this area to help develop the skills or the accommodations that would be needed to equal the playing field and enable people to be successful. But when you get into post-secondary, the IEPs are for high school and public school. The Human Rights Code will assist students and post-secondary schools, or even in your employment circumstances, to find some balance. Now, within this same area, because it falls under the same umbrella, is the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by excessive motor activity, impulsivity, and the inability to focus one's attention. Stimulant medication like Ritalin are generally effective in reducing hyperactivity, but does not lead to general academic gains. Cognitive behavioral treatments help children with ADD adapt better to school. Essentially, the basic thing you ideally should be doing is provide the medication to reduce some of the behaviors, which provides the opportunity to learn and then start to reduce the medication to allow that person to use what they've been learning and engaging their new strategies on their own. Now, this is close to my heart. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 42. It helps explain a lot of history that I had with difficulties in school. But it also demonstrates that in spite of those difficulties, I still found my way into a university degree, graduated, found work, have done some work involving people. It's not a barrier. It's really about what you do to make what is in your way move, or you to come up with creative ways to resource your own outcomes. Okay, let's move into disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders. And we'll start with conduct disorders. Children with conduct disorders purposefully engage in patterns of antisocial behavior that violate social norms and the rights of others. The DSM-5 lists two types of conduct disorders. There's childhood onset type. Symptoms in this case, they start to appear before the age of 10. And then there's an adolescent onset type, and of course that would onset later. Oppositional defiant disorder. Well, this is a disorder occurring in childhood or in adolescence and is characterized by excessive oppositionality and tendencies to refuse requests from parents and others. Many children with conduct disorders, especially boys, display aggressive behavior and have problems controlling their anger. Now, I've worked with a few children with oppositional behavior, and it's really quite difficult. Behavior therapy and other psychosocial interventions may be helpful in modifying behaviors of children with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant behavior. Okay, we're going to move into the last group, and this is the neurocognitive disorders. Neurocognitive disorders are caused by physical or medical disease, or drug use or withdrawal that affects the brain's functioning. Now, these disorders arise when brain is either damaged or impaired in its ability to function because of injury, illness, or exposure to toxins, or use or abuse of psychoactive drugs. Now, one of the first ones we can touch on is delirium. Delirium is a state of extreme mental confusion in which people have difficulty focusing their attention, speaking clearly and coherently, and orientating themselves to the environment in which they're in. The prevalence of the delirium is estimated about 1 to 2% of the general community, but it rises as we get older to about 14% when we are in about age 85. Now, treatment typically involves medication, but it also has environmental changes, maybe decluttering a room or simplifying it, and certainly family supports. Major neurocognitive disorder, it's also known as dementia. Major neurocognitive disorder represents a profound decline or deterioration in mental functioning characterized by significant impairment in memory, thinking process, attention, and judgment, and by specific cognitive deficits. The most frequent cause is the disabling and degenerative brain disease called Alzheimer's. So this is going to be really an important distinction. A lot of people look at Alzheimer's as separate from dementia. Dementia is the big one. Alzheimer's is only one path to get to there. There are other paths that will get you to dementia. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by memory loss and deterioration of other cognitive functions, including judgment and an ability to reason. Now, scientists are exploring the underlying process involved in Alzheimer's disease, focusing on the loss of synapses in the brain. In addition to the formation of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary neurofibrillary tangles. These are seen in the brain of those with Alzheimer's disease. Now, and in this particular period of time, in Canada at least, probably North America would be representative here, is that the population demographic in Canada we'll use is turning from a triangle, all the old, all the young, way more young than the old. But we are now in a place where we look more like a muffin. It's because the baby boomers are getting older, and with all that number, about by 2030, I believe the number is supposed to be close to 25% of the Canadian population will be over 65. With that number over 65, it increases the likelihood that there will be more instances of Alzheimer's disease. Well, there we are. We have completed abnormal psychology, and I hope you've gained something. I hope you have not diagnosed yourself and you have not diagnosed your friends and family. I hope this has found you well. I hope you have a great break. Maybe we'll see you in the winter semester in another class. But if not, take care, enjoy, and good luck in the next semester. Bye now.